25 weird facts about the 1962 Studebaker Avanti. Do you remember the first time you saw a car with no grille and couldn't believe your eyes? In April 1962, a dyeing company from South Bend, Indiana shocked the entire auto industry. Today, we're exploring 25 weird facts about the Studebaker Avanti that prove it was the strangest, boldest American car of its era. Let's start with the fact that the entire car was designed in just 40 days. In the spring of 1961, Studebaker president Sherwood Egbert gave the legendary industrial designer Raymond Loewy an impossible deadline. Loewy rented a house in Palm Springs, California, locked himself inside with three designers, Tom Kellogg, Bob Andrews, and John Epstein, and worked them nearly around the clock. They slept in shifts, ate at their drafting tables, and had a full-size clay model direction in under 6 weeks. Most Detroit cars of that era took 3 to 4 years from sketch to showroom. The Avanti went from a blank sheet of paper to a running prototype in roughly 12 months, a pace that would terrify even modern automakers. When it was unveiled at the New York International Auto Show on April 26, 1962, the crowd had never seen anything like it. 40 days of desert isolation produced a shape that still looks modern more than 60 years later. Think about that. The name was a message to Wall Street. Avanti is Italian for forward, and that choice was no accident. By 1961, Studebaker was bleeding money, losing dealers, and being written off by every financial page in America. The company had lost over $28 million in 1956 alone and never fully recovered. Sherwood Egbert, a former Marine who took over as president in February 1961 at just 40 years old, needed to convince banks, investors, and buyers that Studebaker had a future, not just a past. So the Halo car got a name that literally meant moving forward. Egbert reportedly sketched his ideas for the car's proportions on a napkin during a commercial flight, then handed the project to Loewy. The Avanti wasn't really built to make money on its own. It was built to drag people into showrooms where salesmen could put them in a sensible Lark. In those days, they called it a traffic builder. The name was pure psychology, no grill, on purpose. Walk to the front of an Avanti and you'll find something missing that every American car in 1962 considered mandatory, a grill. Raymond Loewy despised what he called the dollar grin, the massive chrome grills Detroit bolted onto everything in the 50s. His design credo for the Avanti was simple: weight is the enemy, and so is unnecessary chrome. The radiator breathed through a discreet air intake tucked below the front bumper, an idea borrowed from European sports cars and aircraft design. To the average American buyer in 1962, a car without a grille looked like a face without a mouth. Some people were fascinated, others were genuinely unsettled by it. Dealers reported customers walking around the front of the car 2 or 3 times trying to figure out how it cooled itself. Today, in the electric car era, grille-less front ends are everywhere. The Avanti simply got there about 60 years early. The body was made by a boat company. Studebaker had no time and no money to tool up steel body dies, which typically cost millions of dollars and took years. The solution was fiberglass, and the contract went to the Molded Fiber Glass Body Company of Ashtabula, Ohio, an outfit best known for boat hulls and, notably, for supplying early Corvette bodies. Fiberglass meant the Avanti could go from clay model to production in months instead of years, and the tooling cost a fraction of steel. Each body was assembled from more than 100 separate fiberglass pieces bonded together. That's right, over 100. When the pieces didn't line up, and early on they often didn't, the whole car suffered. But fiberglass also meant the Avanti would never rust through its body panels, which is one reason so many survive today. A dyeing wagon maker from Indiana and a boat builder from Ohio teamed up to make one of the most advanced cars in America. First American car with standard disc brakes. Here's a fact that surprises even seasoned car guys. The Avanti was the first mass-produced American car to come with caliper front disc brakes as standard equipment. These were Bendix units built under license from Dunlop in England, similar in concept to what stopped Jaguars at Le Mans. In 1962, virtually every American car relied on drum brakes at all 4 corners, which faded badly under repeated hard stops. Studebaker's engineers knew the Avanti was going to be fast, and they refused to send it out with brakes that couldn't match the engine. Motor magazines of the day praised the stopping power as the best they had ever measured on an American production car. It took the rest of Detroit years to catch up. Ford didn't offer front discs on the Thunderbird until 1965. So the smallest, poorest major automaker in America beat the Big Three to one of the most important safety advances of the century: a built-in roll bar hidden in the roof. Long before federal safety regulations forced anyone's hand, the Avanti came with an integrated steel roll bar built right into the roof structure. You couldn't see it from outside, it was molded into the fiberglass above the rear of the passenger compartment. Sherwood Egbert and his engineers were genuinely obsessed with safety at a time when Detroit marketing departments considered the word bad for business. Remember, this was 4 years before the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act of 1966. Along with the roll bar, the Avanti featured a padded instrument panel, safety cone door locks designed to keep doors shut in a crash, and controls positioned to reduce injury. Insurance men and safety advocates took notice, even if the average buyer never knew the steel hoop was up there protecting his head. It was one more way this strange car from South Bend was quietly living in the future while wearing 1962 license plates. Underneath, it was a compact Lark. Here's the weird part nobody saw. Beneath that space-age fiberglass body sat a modified chassis from the Studebaker Lark convertible, a humble compact that grandmothers drove to church. Studebaker had no money for a new platform, so engineers took the Lark convertible's X-braced frame, shortened it to a 109-inch wheelbase, stiffened it, lowered the suspension mounting points, and added front and rear anti-roll bars. The convertible frame was chosen because it was already reinforced to compensate for the missing steel roof. Chief Engineer Gene Hardig transformed a grocery getter's bones into something that could genuinely handle. Road testers were stunned that the car cornered as well as it did. It was the automotive equivalent of building a fighter jet on a crop duster's frame. Hard to believe, right? But when you have no budget and no time, you get creative. And Studebaker's engineers were nothing if not creative. The hood bulge is off-center on purpose. Look closely at an Avanti's hood and you'll notice something that bothers perfectionists to this day. The air intake bulge is not centered. It sits offset toward the driver's side, and Raymond Loewy did it deliberately. He believed perfect symmetry was static and boring, and that asymmetry created visual tension and a sense of motion even when the car was parked. The bulge also honestly reflected what was underneath, clearing the supercharger and air cleaner plumbing on blown cars. European coach builders had played with asymmetry for decades, but in America in 1962 it was practically heresy. Buyers would stand in showrooms pointing at the hood, convinced the factory had made a mistake. Salesmen had to explain, no, the famous Mr. Loewy wanted it that way. Whether you find it brilliant or maddening, that little off-center hump is one of the details that makes an Avanti unmistakable from 50 feet away. Did you or anyone in your family ever own a Studebaker back in the day? Tell us which model in the comments, and tell us what part of the country you grew up in. We love hearing those stories. The cockpit was designed like an airplane. Slide into an Avanti and you didn't sit in a car, you strapped into an aircraft. Loewy's team gave it 4 individual bucket seats, a full-length center console, and, most famously, a row of toggle switches mounted in an overhead console above the windshield, exactly like a private plane. The instrument panel carried a full set of round gauges, including a 160-mile-per-hour speedometer, a tachometer, and a manifold pressure gauge on supercharged cars. At night, the controls glowed with aircraft-style lighting so your eyes wouldn't lose their adjustment to the dark road. Even the interior door releases were designed with aviation logic. Sherwood Egbert had a pilot's sensibilities, and Loewy had spent years designing for the aviation world, including work that influenced the look of presidential aircraft. In an era when most American dashboards were chrome-plated jukeboxes, the Avanti's cockpit felt serious, purposeful, and about 20 years ahead of schedule. The Coke bottle shape before Detroit discovered it. The Avanti's pinched waist and flared rear haunches gave it what designers later called the Coke bottle profile, and it wore that shape years before it swept through Detroit. Loewy, who not coincidentally had refined the actual Coca-Cola bottle and designed the Lucky Strike package, understood curves better than anyone in the business. The Avanti had no tail fins in an era when fins were only just dying, no chrome side spears, and no two-tone paint gimmicks. Its wedge-shaped nose sat lower than its tail, a raked stance borrowed from aerodynamic theory that said the body itself should slice the air. By the mid-60s, cars like the 1965 Impala and 1966 Charger were all wearing pinched waist styling, and by 1968, practically everything in a Chevrolet showroom had it. The Avanti was simply first. When people say a car looks ahead of its time, this is the car that phrase was invented for. Studebaker bought a supercharger company to feed it. When the engineers realized the Avanti's 289 cubic inch V8 needed more punch, Studebaker didn't just order parts, the company bought the whole supplier. In 1962, Studebaker acquired Paxton Products, the California supercharger firm run by Andy Granatelli and his brothers. The base R1 engine made 240 horsepower with a hotter cam, dual-point ignition, and 4-barrel carburetor. Add the Paxton centrifugal supercharger, and you had the R2 delivering around 289 horsepower, 1 horsepower per cubic inch by the marketing math. The blower whined like a distant siren under full throttle, a sound Avanti owners never forget. Superchargers were exotic hardware in 1962, found mostly at drag strips and Bonneville, not in showrooms. Studebaker put one under warranty and sold it to the public. Buying Paxton also brought the Granatelli brothers into the family, and as you're about to hear, that decision put Studebaker in the record books. 29 records in the Utah Salt. In late 1962 and into 1963, Andy Granatelli took Avantis to the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah and rewrote the record books. Driving on the blinding white salt, Granatelli and his team captured 29 national speed records for production cars, flying mile runs, standing starts, endurance distances, the works. Picture it, a car from a company most people thought was already dead, screaming across the salt faster than anything Detroit sold. Granatelli himself, a heavy-set showman who would later become famous for STP and Indianapolis 500 glory, did much of the driving personally. Studebaker's ad men plastered the achievements everywhere, calling the Avanti America's most advanced automobile. The records were real, certified, and humiliating for the Big Three. A team of brothers from Chicago and a broke company from Indiana proved that courage and clever engineering could still beat Detroit's billions. Let that sink in. The fastest production car in America. The wildest version was the R3, a bored-out 304.5 cubic inch supercharged V8 conservatively rated at 335 horsepower. In 1963, an R3-powered Avanti ran 170.78 miles per hour at Bonneville, making it the fastest American production car you could theoretically buy. That's right, faster than any Corvette, any Ford, any Chrysler letter car of the day. Granatelli talked openly about chasing 200 miles per hour in a project the team called Duecento, Italian for 200. Here's the weird footnote: the factory only ever installed the R3 in a mere 9 production Avantis before the walls came down, making them among the rarest American performance cars ever built. Today, a genuine R3 Avanti is a 7-figure conversation at any major auction. The little company that built covered wagons for pioneers held America's production speed crown as its final act. If that's not a Hollywood ending, nothing is. If these are bringing the memories flooding back, you are exactly who we make these for. Do us one small favor and subscribe so the next trip down memory lane finds you. That is all we ask. Now back to it. The rear windows kept popping out. Now for the embarrassing part. Those early fiberglass bodies from Ashtabula arrived at South Bend warped, wavy, and out of alignment, and the most notorious symptom was rear windows that didn't fit their openings. On some early cars, the curved backlight could actually loosen or pop from its surround because the body aperture was distorted. Hoods didn't match fenders, doors needed hand fitting, and workers spent hours filling and sanding each body. Studebaker eventually got so frustrated that it pulled much of the body finishing work in-house at South Bend, which cost precious time and money the company didn't have. Every week of delay meant customers waiting on cars that didn't come. For a vehicle marketed as America's most advanced automobile, leaky, ill-fitting glass was a public relations nightmare. The Avanti's greatest enemy was never Chevrolet or Ford. It was its own birth pains arriving faster than its factory could handle. Thousands of orders died in the waiting line. The Avanti's launch created genuine excitement, and orders poured in through the summer of 1962. Then came the fiberglass fiasco, and cars that should have been delivered in weeks took months. Buyers who had put down deposits grew tired of waiting, and many of them walked across the street and drove home in a new 1963 Corvette Stingray instead, which launched that fall with its own show-stopping styling. By most accounts, thousands of orders were canceled during the delay. Sales momentum the Avanti never recovered. Think about the cruelty of the timing. Studebaker finally had a car people were lining up for, the first time in years, and the factory physically could not build them fast enough. In the car business, excitement has a shelf life measured in weeks. When the bodies finally started flowing properly, the moment had passed, and the headlines had moved on to Chevrolet's new plastic sports car. It cost more than a Corvette. Here's a number that raised eyebrows in 1962. The Avanti's base price was $4,245, which works out to well over $45,000 in today's money. A brand new Corvette stickered for hundreds less, and a full-size Impala hardtop could be had for under $3,000. Load an Avanti with the supercharged R2 engine, power shift automatic, air conditioning, and power accessories, and you were pushing past $5,000, serious Cadillac territory. Studebaker was asking premium money from a public that wasn't sure the company would exist long enough to honor the warranty, and that fear was whispered in every showroom. For buyers who took the leap, the Avanti delivered features no Corvette had: disc brakes, a roll bar, 4 seats, and supercharged power. But price a halo car above America's sweetheart sports car from a company on financial life support, and you're asking customers for an act of faith. Fewer built than a single day of Impalas. For all its fame, the original Avanti is genuinely rare. Studebaker built roughly 4,600 of them in total, about 3,800 for the 1963 model year, and around 800 more for 1964 before the axe fell. To put that in perspective, Chevrolet was building more Impalas than that in a single good day of production. The Avanti's entire 2-year run wouldn't fill one corner of a modern factory parking lot. Because the fiberglass bodies never rusted and owners tended to be devoted, an unusually high percentage survive today, with active clubs tracking cars by serial number. Nice drivers can still be found in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, which many collectors consider one of the great bargains in the classic car world, while supercharged R2 cars and the handful of R3s command far more. Rarity, beauty, and a heartbreaking story, that's the collector car trifecta. James Bond's creator bought one. Of all the celebrity endorsements Studebaker could have dreamed of, this one was almost too perfect. Ian Fleming, the British author who created James Bond, personally ordered a Studebaker Avanti and had it shipped across the Atlantic. Fleming was a serious car enthusiast who gave Bond his taste for fast machinery, and the man could have driven anything, an Aston Martin, a Bentley, a Jaguar from his own backyard. Instead, he chose the strange fiberglass rocket from Indiana, reportedly calling it a beautiful piece of design. Picture the author of Goldfinger cruising the English countryside in a supercharged Avanti while writing about secret agents. Other notable names gravitated to the car too, and Raymond Loewy himself kept examples of his creation. But Fleming's purchase remains the ultimate cool factor stamp of approval. The most famous spy novelist on Earth looked at everything Europe offered and picked the Studebaker. If 007 himself had ever traded in the Aston Martin, we know exactly what Fleming would have handed him the keys to. You heard right, built by America's oldest vehicle maker. Here's some perspective that makes the Avanti even stranger. The company that built this fiberglass space capsule started making horse-drawn wagons in 1852, a full 110 years earlier. The Studebaker brothers of South Bend supplied wagons to pioneers heading west on the Oregon Trail and to the Union Army during the Civil War. By the early 1900s, Studebaker was the only wagon maker to successfully transition into automobiles, surviving world wars, the Depression, and the collapse of dozens of rival independents. That means the same company name appeared on covered wagons rolling toward California gold country and on a supercharged coupe running 170 miles per hour on the Bonneville Salt. No other American manufacturer can claim an arc like that, from oxen to overhead toggle switches in one corporate lifetime. When you see an Avanti, you're looking at the final flair of the oldest name in American transportation. Imagine that! Which fact on this list surprised you the most so far? Be honest, did you even know Studebaker built America's fastest car? Let us know down below. We read every single comment. The factory died. While the car was alive, the Avanti didn't fail, its factory did. On December 9, 1963, barely 20 months after the car's triumphant debut, Studebaker announced it was shutting down the South Bend, Indiana plant, ending over a century of vehicle production in that city. Roughly 6,000 workers lost their jobs just weeks before Christmas, a blow South Bend spent decades recovering from. Sherwood Egbert, the driving force behind the Avanti, had been forced out that November, gravely ill with the cancer that would take his life in 1969 at just 48. Studebaker consolidated car production at its smaller plant in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, building only bread-and-butter Larks and later cruisers until the very end in March 1966. The Avanti, the Hawk, and the trucks didn't make the trip north. The most advanced American car of its day was orphaned, not because buyers rejected it, but because its parent simply collapsed underneath it. 2 car dealers refused to let it die. Now comes one of the strangest resurrection stories in automotive history. Nate Altman and Leo Newman, partners in a South Bend Studebaker dealership, couldn't accept that the Avanti was finished. In 1964, they bought the rights to the name, the body tooling, and a portion of the old Studebaker factory complex on Lafayette Boulevard. Think about the audacity of that. 2 local car dealers purchasing the corpse of a car from a dying automaker and deciding to build it themselves by hand, with no corporate backing whatsoever. They hired former Studebaker craftsmen who knew the car intimately and set up what amounted to a boutique coachworks inside the ghost of the old plant. In 1965, the Avanti II was born, nearly identical outside, hand-built inside, and aimed at wealthy buyers who wanted something nobody else had. Detroit analysts gave them a year. They were off by decades. The resurrected Avanti had a Corvette heart. With Studebaker engines out of production, Altman and Newman needed power, so they went straight to the enemy. The Avanti II was fitted with Chevrolet's 327 cubic inch Corvette V8 producing 300 horsepower, and later versions used 350 and 400 cubic inch Chevy engines. So the car born to save Studebaker ended up running the heartbeat of General Motors, and honestly, buyers loved it, because parts and service were available at any Chevy dealer in America. Each Avanti II was essentially bespoke. Customers chose their own paint, sometimes matched to a wife's favorite dress, along with custom leather and thick carpeting, and production ran to only a few hundred cars per year at prices that eventually exceeded a Cadillac's. Celebrities and executives quietly collected them. It was no longer a mass-market moonshot, it was America's answer to a hand-built European Grand Tourer, assembled in the shadow of a dead factory. The design outlived 5 different owners. Here's the fact that cements the Avanti as a phenomenon. That 40-day design from a Palm Springs living room stayed in production in one form or another for over 4 decades. After Nate Altman died in 1976, the company passed through a string of owners, real estate developer Stephen Blake in the early 80s, then others who moved production from South Bend to Youngstown, Ohio, and eventually to Villa Rica, Georgia, with final cars built as late as 2006 on Pontiac Firebird and even Ford Mustang underpinnings. Convertibles and even 4-door versions appeared along the way. Think about that lifespan. A car designed in 1961 was still being sold new when flat-screen TVs were in stores. No other American body design comes close to that kind of endurance across 5 ownership groups in 3 states. Raymond Loewy passed away in 1986, knowing his 6-week desert sprint had outlived the company it was meant to save. Loewy's team averaged under 30 years old. For a car this important, the design team was shockingly young and shockingly small. Aside from Loewy himself, who was in his late 60s, the Palm Springs crew consisted of just 3 men. Tom Kellogg was a young stylist, barely into his 30s. John Epstein managed the studio, and Bob Andrews handled sculpting duties. 4 people, 1 rented house, 1 client. Compare that to Detroit, where a new model passed through committees, clinics, executive reviews, and styling departments employing hundreds. Loewy banned distractions, reportedly kept the team isolated from newspapers and telephones, and pinned inspirational notes to the walls with commandments like "Wait is the enemy." Kellogg later recalled sketching constantly while Loewy edited ruthlessly, keeping only the boldest ideas. The lesson has been taught in design schools ever since. Small teams with total freedom and brutal deadlines sometimes produce what armies of committees never could. The Avanti is Exhibit A. Would you rather have an original supercharged Avanti or a hand-built Avanti II with the Corvette engine? Tell us your pick in the comments. We love a good debate. It became a collector legend for the weirdest reason. And finally, here's the strangest fact of all. The Avanti is beloved today largely because of everything that went wrong. If Studebaker had survived, the Avanti would have been facelifted, watered down, decontented, and eventually replaced, just like every other car. Instead, the company's collapse froze it in amber, pure, unchanged, exactly as Loewy drew it. Museums from the Smithsonian's orbit to the Studebaker National Museum in South Bend celebrate it as a design landmark, and in 1970 surveys of industrial designers, it ranked among the most significant American car designs ever. The Avanti Owners Association International keeps thousands of members connected across the country. Every failure, the popped windows, the canceled orders, the dead factory became part of the legend. Nobody romanticizes a car that succeeded easily. They romanticize the beautiful long shot that almost made it, and no American car was ever a more beautiful long shot than this one. Next time, the topic is yours. Tell us down in the comments what you want us to bring back, and the comment with the most likes is the one we make. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it.
Don't you think you're being unfair to yourself?
Ano po, siguro unfair, pero po kasi, pero po siguro talaga kapag mabait.
Alam mo, I feel masarap sa pakiramdam na tayo ay maging mabait,